Hi, I'm Spencer Campbell of Gila RPGs, and this is the Slayers 1.5 changelog review. I'm hoping in this video to go over some of the major changes in Slayers 1.5 to give you an idea of what's new, what's changed, what's been taken away, all of that to create this new version of Slayers. Before I jump into that, what is Slayers 1.5? Slayers 1.5 is a rules lift of the previous rule set for Slayers. I don't consider it a second edition because we're not fundamentally changing the way the game works. It's still the same monster hunting game with asymmetric classes where each class plays by its own set of rules in combat. The only difference here is that we've tweaked a few things, we've clarified a few things, we've made the game faster, easier, more exciting, and fun to play. And I want to talk about some of those changes that let that happen. Before we talk about rules or anything like that, it's important to note two really big, important changes. One, editing. The game has actually been edited now. Believe it or not, the first edition of Slayers was not edited. I wrote it, I tried to edit it on my own, but there's only so much that I can do. I've hired my good friend Will Yopes to edit this book. If you've seen any of my previous games that I've had editing on them, Will has been the editor. They are a fantastic designer on their own, which means they have a fantastic eye for catching editing mistakes and things like that in text. I'm extremely excited to have Will on the project for Slayers 1.5. So the book will just simply read better because of that. Speaking of just sort of being better, the book is getting a major lift in the layout and art of it. I enjoyed the original layout and the original art of Slayers. I think it captured the ideas and vibes of this weird mishmash city, but now we're going to have sort of a more unified style throughout the entire thing. I've hired my really good friend Mike Riemann to handle that. Mike, if you have seen previous work like the Dust Supplement for Slayers or the recently released Slayers Almanac, Mike did all the layout and the art for those. So the very cool art style that Mike has brought with things like you saw, like with the Deadeye class or the landscape art in the Slayers Almanac, we're going to see some of that sort of material show up in Slayers 1.5, as well as just a new layout that looks and fits the part of this new vibe that we're going for. I'm really excited about that. I've shared some of it on in spaces like Discord and Twitter, so you can see some previews of that somewhere out there on the internet. All right, let's talk about what makes Slayers 1.5 new in terms of rules. Some more like broad changes that are kind of across the board things. We've added a thing called a ready action. I think the ready action is a really important and helpful change here. What this is a thing that all of the classes do at the start of a fight. So before combat begins, all of the classes, each Slayer has a ready action that they do. We kind of had this already with two of the classes. We're just codifying it and giving it to all of them now. So, for example, the Tactician already did this because they had an action at the beginning of combat where they rolled their strategy pool to get their dice that they would use for swapping out. And the gunslinger kind of loaded up their bullets and got things ready. So these both were already getting ready. We've just done this now for all of the classes. So now the blade has one and the arcanist has one as well. I'll talk about what those are when we talk about individual classes. Another big and helpful improvement here is that moving is no longer one of your two actions while you are doing things during combat. You get to move for free. So now you just get to go do you get to go do more stuff during your turn while also maintaining your mobility. I mean, most of the time Slayers were moving every turn anyways, and so half of their turn was eaten up with this sort of necessary movement as you run around this wild landscape fighting monsters. That immediately made it so that basically you would always move and then attack, move and attack. And I wanted to try and pull us away from that sort of repetitive process. So by having move be a free thing, what we've done is we've invited the player to do other things. They've got their attack action, they have their quick action, and they can now start using skills without feeling like they're using up like their entire turn doing something like a skill roll to quickly climb up a ledge or something like that. I think that's going to make combat more interesting for the players. It's going to allow the GM to create more interesting scenarios where the players won't feel like they have to be mobile or not mobile on their turn. I think it's just in generally going to be a lot more fun to do combat with the ready action and movement being free. It's also a little bit harder to die now. I'm just generally not a big fan of character death. And so this has kind of been clarified in the rulebook. But basically, if you are down, if you go to 0 HP, you can get back up. You can get healed and back into the fight. And you really only die if you're at 0 and you get hit again. And as a table, you've agreed that that's the sort of stakes that you want. So I just think that's an important thing to talk about is that Slayers, while not a power fantasy like many of my other games, is still a game about kind of exciting monster hunting. And it's not as exciting if your characters are just getting killed off all the time. Let's talk a little bit about specific class changes. The blade has a single change. Besides like small wording changes that we see in things, the major changes for the classes, the blade has their ready action now. So now they get to start the fight in a stance. Technically, the blade didn't get to start in a stance in the previous version. You had to use your quick action to get into your first stance. And so let's just get you right away into things. Choose the stance that fits the vibe of the fight that you're about to go to. And now you have the kind of freedom to use your quick actions more because movement is free to move around and dance between stances as you're fighting throughout the combat with monsters. The Gunslinger got a few more changes than everybody else. The ready action is now just the loading gun. That's now just been clarified as the ready action instead of sort of a thing that gets added into the attack action. Generally, I've made the Gunslinger more powerful or more dangerous. They deal more harm per hit. I wanted to lift the Gunslinger in terms of power to be matching something like the very deadly blade, as opposed to bringing the blade down and generally nerfing things. I like buffing rather than nerfing. The trigger limit is gone. Speaking of, that just wasn't really fitting the vibe of that particular class. It seemed like a strange limit for Slayers in particular. So I just got rid of it. Anything that was related to trigger limit, there were some advances. They've been replaced with new advances that the Gunslinger can go grab. And basically, I also, to kind of continue to make the Gunslinger more effective, all those runes that were just effects like pushing or tarring things up, they have a harm. So they deal at least one harm now, not the two harm that you can do with a normal bullet, but they deal one harm so that you don't feel like you're completely wasting that bullet by not doing any damage to the monster and just getting some sort of side effect. So the Gunslinger got brought up, much more effective, I think. The Arcanist, it made a few small tweaks for the Arcanist. Generally, first of all, faster. The D4 for the speed die was brutal for the Arcanist. And it didn't necessarily match the vibe of what the spellcaster is. The spellcaster is not always going to be this sort of like slow, reactive sort of person. Sometimes they are proactive. So increase the speed die to D6. I also increased the starting spells that they know to 4. I want the Arcanist to have a little bit more flexibility in what they can do. So now they just know more spells going into the fights, or just into character creation. And now they have a ready action, which is choosing a favored spell. Basically, anytime you use the base version of the non-boosted version of this spell during combat, you don't take corruption. So you can choose the spell at the start of the fight that you think is going to be the one you're going to spend the most time using or is going to be really helpful to you that you don't want to take corruption on. You still take corruption if you boost it. So if you want that boosted effect, you're still going to take some corruption, but it's not going to be as much as just casting it and taking the boost corruption. You'll notice that the Tactician has no changes. It's because the Tactician is a perfect class. I nailed that 1-in-1. There's no need to change anything about it. Really, there's only just small wording changes for the Tactician. It already had the ready action through the strategy pool, and everything else with the Tactician honestly works the way that I want it to work. So we're good there. Monsters. How did I change some monsters? First of all, of course, just generally tweaking some wording and numbers just so that monsters are clearer, easier to use, and things like that. I've also changed the way that I formatted the stat block for monsters. They're much more readable, I think. They're much more, the usability of them has been made easier for the GM so that you can kind of quickly reference what they can do. Also, every monster gets a free move action because that's how the Slayers are working, just making it kind of clear that these characters, even though they're on opposite sides of each other, function similarly to one another. There are 3 sort of distinct effects that the monsters have: passives, passives, actions, and reactions. It used to be called ongoing effects. I've just called them passives. Passive is just a term that is used more often in TTRPGs, and so it's just a more familiar word. And also, ongoing implies maybe some sort of like ability to disrupt it or something like that. Passive just means this is always happening. I also made a note in the monster section that in the very rare instance that you feel like a monster would need to roll a die, maybe to do like a skill action, the monsters don't have skill values. But maybe your players have done something where it feels like the monster needs to roll a die to see what they do. I've just recommended using a d6 to resolve anything like that. That would sort of represent their ability to do a skill. You, of course, can always change that at a table, especially maybe more effective monsters could roll a d8 or even a d10. But I just wanted to include something because a few players had mentioned instances where monsters probably could have benefited from having a roll and they just don't have it. Also, in general, made some advice on how to make monsters for those GMs who want to create their own. Couple more sections to cover here. First of all, district changes. Just clarified wording on the existing NPCs, factions, and rumors that exist already in the book. You're still going to get all the factions or the districts that were in the first Slayers. They're all just going to look nicer now because of the new layout and art. It's going to actually look very similar to the Slayers Almanac style. So if you enjoy the Slayers Almanac style of districts, I think you're going to like the way that the districts from Slayers 1.5 looks. We've also just sort of generally made the rumors a little bit more enticing, a little bit more interesting for you to pursue. Wanting to create a unified vibe in terms of how the hooks were written across all the districts, just so that you want, like, when you hear these rumors, you want to go pursue them, as opposed to thinking like, oh well, that's interesting, but doesn't sound like Slayer's work to me. So now it's all there to kind of hook in your players. Overall, general things that go beyond the rules and everything like that. I've provided some clearer examples of things in the text just to clarify like what I mean when I'm describing certain rules. The presentation of ideas in the GM section has also been clarified. I know that I tend to write GM sections that are just kind of like a little hand wavy, and I know some people like a little bit more structure, so I've provided that in the GM section. There's a reference page now to, there always was a reference page. It's just been updated to reflect all the changes that I've described here and that have been made in the document. And obviously, the character sheets have been updated as well to reflect the new versions of the characters. So that kind of wraps it up. I just want to sort of end this with a couple of things here. One, hopefully you can kind of see that this isn't a second edition of Slayers. It's still Slayers. It's still the same core experience that you love. I've just improved it. We've just clarified some things, cleaned up some places, streamlined the experience. And so I think 1.5 feels like a very good way of talking about it. Think of it instead as a refinement or a definitive version of Slayers. And a last sort of announcement for this, well, two announcements. One, we will be doing a print run of this. Once the files are complete, I will be doing a print run. So there will be a new book. Just saying right now, it's about 100 pages long, so it's a little bit longer than the original version. We're gonna get that printed. That'll be available on all my storefronts that you've seen before. So if you want this new version with the art and the layout and the rules changes, keep an eye out for announcements about that. And if you've already owned Slayers, if you already own it on itch, great news. You're going to get the new version 1.5 for free. Once it's done, I will just be uploading, and I'll upload that file to itch in the same Slayers game page. I'm not going to make a new game page for Slayers. It's just going to be the same one, and it's just going to have the new version of it. So if you already own Slayers, great news. You're going to get the new version as soon as it's done. Speaking of when it's going to be done, current estimates are showing that it's going to be done around June. If you're watching this and it's past the end of June and it's already out, cool, congratulations, go play Slayers. If you're watching this ahead of time, well, then just keep an eye out. Slayers 1.5 will be coming soon. I can't wait to hear what you all think about this. Let me know what you think about these changes. You can either share them in the comments below. You can reach out to me on Twitter at Gila RPGs. You could join the Gila RPGs Discord, find other people to play Slayers. This isn't the end of Slayers. There's still a lot more to come. I'm working on a number of different supplements and other things for it, but I'm excited to bring this new version of the game to you. So until next time, bye.